one of the biggest challenges when it comes to creativity, or one of the biggest problems, the most common problems that I hear of talking to other people who are into sharing their creativity, whether it's music or writing or painting, is the question of what do I actually talk about? What am I trying to say? What's the idea? If only I had an idea, a starting point that was great. It's that thing of like, if the starting idea needs to be great, like I caught lightning in a bottle, but oftentimes the ideas that come to us, we reject straight away, because we compare them to such a high standard in terms of the art and the creativity that we admire the most, it's quite natural, I think, as human beings, to compare what we're doing to other people or other things, to compare what we have to what someone else has. I think that's quite a common natural instinct, but it's one that should be treated with caution, I think, because it's very likely in most of those cases, those creative things, or those pieces of music, that writing, that you're comparing the thing that you're working on to, likely didn't start fully formed. It was something that was iterated on and honed into something that became the final form, I guess, of that creative project. So for an example, David Lynch talks quite a lot about the idea that ideas are out there and you don't really think of them. They don't come from within. They're just floating around, and that you need to catch them. So, and I think that's very true in a certain sense, but that's true of the initial idea, or the initial. It could be the smallest thought. So, for instance, like in my case, for an example, because I like to paint and I like to write songs and for my own enjoyment, really, to create my own artistic content. So I've been into painting, particularly earlier this year. I got really into painting again, and the paintings were sort of quite abstract and expressionist, sort of inspired a little bit by a trip that I went on to Barcelona the previous year in 2024, and I walked around some of the famous galleries there, looking at some of the expressionist paintings, and that was kind of a big influence on me. But I digress. I got very into painting and inspired by that. So I started. I knew that I wanted to paint, and I had some feedback from some of the paintings. A lot of people, because I sort of sold some of them to people I know, or people that found them on the internet, and people would ask me, do you have like a fully formed idea for what this painting is going to be when you start it? Because they're not like realistic paintings, they're like very abstract or impressionist. And the answer to that is actually no. Like, I would start with a feeling or a very basic idea, usually with like a wash on the page that I was painting on. And then I would just initially, almost without thinking, like trying to just be open to possibility and what would be the first thing to come into my head, I would just paint whatever shapes that I felt were right or that I wanted to see on top of that basic like colour. And then that would promote or prompt the next step of that. Like how can I take what I've done here and then build on it or modify it? And almost going through the steps of creating these paintings, it sort of ended up being what it was based on the accumulation of all those decisions. And then sometimes I would go back and like rechange sections of it. But I think it's a good example or a good way of pointing out that it's the initial idea that is the seed, and then it doesn't immediately start out as fully formed and great. So the initial idea should not be discarded. It should be nurtured and encouraged to grow into what it ultimately wants to be. You very rarely, I think, get an idea that you think, this is amazing. I need to go and hurry and follow all these check boxes. That once I've ticked all these boxes, it'll be complete. And it's not like a progress bar where you just move to from a complete blueprint of a piece of art that reflects you and your creativity completely to from 0 to 100%. You might go around and about, and as you go along that journey, being creative and looking at the idea and thinking about how you could tie it to other ideas and build on it, it sort of takes on a life of its own. And I think that's true of all the certainly my favourite pieces of art and creativity by people that I respect and admire. A great example of this in literature is that comes to mind is probably J.R.R. Tolkien, Professor Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. Because when you read his letters about the process of writing that book, which took him a great many years to complete, when he started writing that book, he didn't really have a complete vision of what that book would be in his head. He just knew that he wanted to write a sequel to The Hobbit, and he would draft out these chapters and write up to a certain point, and then realize that he didn't like certain aspects of what it was that he'd written, and he would go back and rewrite them. And then through the process of rewriting those chapters, he would then find that the story would go in a completely different way, and then new characters would come in, and then he would ask questions about where those characters came from and how they connected, and then that would give him the answer almost through reverse, being a detective in his imagined world. Using the internal logic of that imagined world, he discovered the answers and almost discovered the story as if it was there waiting to be unearthed. And I think that, coming back to that point about David Lynch, that this rings true in the sense that it was a great idea that was out there, and he just happened to manage to reel it in and catch it and realize it in such a way that it rang true. And I think that's one of those sort of great works that does ring true, and that it stands alone really in terms of the way that it's written and the narrative style being so unique, but in that at the same time became very successful because there's the truth there about that creative process that he went on that journey to realize it, which I find fascinating. Just in terms of the way he describes that in those letters, he wrote things like he was surprised to find certain things out or to meet certain characters along the journey of writing that book. They were a revelation to him. I think one of the most famous ones that springs to mind, if for those who are familiar with the book or even the films, is that he knew about this world and he knew about the context that he was writing about in terms of the characters and the sort of the basic idea. But then as he went on this journey with the characters through the initial chapters, he'd never been in his brain, he'd never been to Bree, and he'd never sat in the prancing pony. And he describes the appearance of the character that would become Aragorn or Strider as he's introduced to the hobbits. He described that as he didn't know who Aragorn was, he didn't know who this person was, but through working that idea and building on it and going along and asking those questions, he discovered the truth of that. So that's just, I've gone round with that Lord of the Rings example, but I think it's a really good example of a really good reminder that great ideas never really land completely fully formed in the mind, and it's really not the best practice to discard an idea because we have ideas all the time, and I think we should definitely hold on to them and make an effort to build on them and develop them, because it's so easy to just think of something and go, oh, well, that's no good, that'll never work, throw it away. No, don't throw it away, hold on to it, and see where it takes you, because a lot of the time, even it's true in every medium, I think, from painting to, in terms of like the journey that I described, in terms of those paintings that I was doing, in terms of songwriting or writing fiction or whatever it might be, designing fashion or designing an outfit. Be curious about that idea, because it comes from somewhere, and it'll probably, if you pay attention to it, lead you somewhere really interesting and unique. And I think it's the ideas that get discarded and thrown aside that very often that's a wasted opportunity, and that could have flourished into something great. And I think as well, just in terms of the ideas being out there and floating out there, coming back to that idea that David Lynch talks about in terms of the ideas being out and about, floating, waiting to be caught. I think we can all relate to the experience of being at an inconvenient juncture or being caught unawares by an idea, because you're in the middle of something else, or you're traveling from one place to another, or quite often people say that they get ideas in the shower or when they're brushing their teeth or whatever it might be, and the idea comes and it seems really promising, but they discard it because they're in the middle of something else and the brain isn't fully focused on the challenging work of generating ideas. They just sort of kind of bubble up to the surface while we're distracted with some less interesting task, usually some routine task like driving to work or making your bed or whatever it could be. Quite often I think that, because I go running quite a lot, and because that's routine, sometimes I'll be caught unawares by ideas because I'm just my mind's like in a very relaxed state. I'm not forcing anything to the forefront, and I'll just be out running, and then something will come into my head. And I think it's easier than ever now, because we all have like a notes app on our phone, to just pull that notes app out and get into the habit of making a note of that idea, even if it's just in shorthand, just quick little few words that will summarize that idea to make your brain be able to go back to it. Because sometimes those ideas that come to us in those moments, they go in and you think brilliant, and then something else happens and then you're like, wait, what was that idea? So I think that's a really good habit to get into as well, in terms of creative block, and thinking about things that we can apply our technical skills and our creative skills into projects that have like a driving force behind them, the idea, the seed of that creativity. So I have been trying to do this a lot more recently as well. So I've done a few little different things, like making sure that the Notes app on my phone is pinned to like the home screen, and I don't really have a lot of clutter on my home screen on my phone. I just have like my Notes app. I use Notion to sort of keep track of ideas and stuff like that, which is really good, like project management, like planning app. It's got loads of functionality and utility, but I find it's a really good way to like nest ideas and make a note of like when I want to do certain tasks related to those ideas. So go and have a look at Notion if that's something you're interested in. But even just a basic Notes app, somewhere where you can go in and just go, okay, I've just had this random idea float into my head. Before it floats away again, I'm going to make a note of it. And then just having that process of going in and making that note, and then making time at the end of the day or at the end of the week to go back into your Notes app and go, oh yeah, I remember that now. And then putting the time aside to then develop that idea, just the initial idea, having that idea itself, that's the first step. Don't throw them away. And yeah, in terms of songwriting as well, which is something I'm quite interested in. I do write my own songs just for my own amusement more than anything else. But again, like, it's really easy in music as well to think of, you might come up with a melody, for instance, or like a chord progression, and it's really easy to come up with the starting idea for a chord progression or a melody, and then compare it to, like, I don't know, something like by one of your favorite artists, and go, well, obviously this chord progression or this melody is, absolute trash next to that. It should just go in the bin. But again, those songs that you really respect and look up to or admire, I'm pretty willing to bet that most of them didn't start fully formed. They probably started out as like really simple ideas, and then through the process of iterating on them, thinking, oh, what if I reharmonized this part of the melody? What if I did a little bit of modal interchange here? And what if I just switched into a different tonal center for this part? Just the ornamentation and then the arrangement of coming up with songs, thinking about, well, there could be like a really interesting thing happening with the bass here, where we've for instance, like, just move into a complete different inversion of a chord to add like an element of surprise, or it could be anything, any little trick, or like a time signature, playing around with tempos and interesting counterpoints. And before you know it, when you've worked out all the tiny little details and little tricks of rhythm and tempo and tonal like quality, before you know it, you've got something that when you step back from it and you look at it and you go, wow, this is actually really interesting. But it all starts from a very basic point of view, and again, you won't get the idea for a song with a fully formed like arrangement and score. You'll start off with some really basic melodic idea or something, and then you just iterate on it and build on it. So in terms of ways to tackle creative block and trying to force ideas or discarding ideas because we reject them as inferior, I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that don't do that. Take hold of those ideas, build on them, and make interesting choices along the way as you try to arrive at something that satisfies you creatively. And once you've gone down that process of making all those different decisions, each one of those decisions is something that it will ring true to you. And then at the end of that process, when you step back from everything, you'll look at it and people will be able to look at it. And if you've been true to yourself creatively along that process, there'll be a truth to that, and there'll be some really interesting ideas in there that speak to who you are as a person. So this is something that's been in the forefront of my mind recently, just in terms of my songwriting and my approach to creativity in terms of like photography and painting and writing, and now sitting here talking to you as well. Just that thing of never throw away an idea, write down the ideas, build on them, and just the process of doing that gives us so many opportunities to create something that ends up being really interesting, and the truer to ourselves, into the sort of reverse detective work of uncovering the layers of the onion of that idea that we are, the more I think it resonates with people. So coming back to like my paintings, like I was talking about earlier, people were intrigued by enough to ask me, oh, well, how did you come up with that fully formed in your head? And the answer being no. It was something that it revealed itself to me as I worked it, and the more that I worked on the idea, the more I knew which way to take it, but I didn't necessarily know which way to take it from the start. So yeah, keep hold of those ideas, write them down, and go and make something really unique is the lesson. And that is my advice on how to tackle creative block. So, but I'm curious to know if you resonate with any of this, if it rings true for you creatively. So please let me know, and yeah, I'll see you hopefully Soon. Okay, goodbye.